"Excuse me, are you lost?" She said it with a smile, the kind that isn't kind. The kind that pretends to ask, but really just tells you, you don't belong. I looked up at her. My ticket was still warm in my hand. 3B, first class. "I'm not lost," I told her. She didn't move. Her eyes swept over me like I was misplaced luggage. "This seat isn't for you." People turned. A few stared, then quickly looked away. Not one voice spoke up. Not one person asked to see my ticket. Not even her. I held it tighter, but my fingers were starting to shake. They didn't see my grades. They didn't see how hard I worked, or how excited my dad was when he surprised me with this trip. They saw my skin, and that was enough. But she didn't just question my seat. She questioned who I was allowed to be. And what she didn't know, what none of them could imagine, is that before this plane lands, she'll wish she'd never opened her mouth. I didn't say anything as she walked away. I just sat there, staring out the window, pretending not to notice how the cabin had gone quiet around me. The hum of the aircraft filled the silence, mixing with the muted rustle of carry-ons and half-hearted conversations. But my ears weren't hearing any of it. They were ringing hot, like when you've been out in the cold too long and step into a warm room. I shifted in the seat, soft leather, wide armrest, the kind of luxury that still felt a little unreal to me. It was my first time flying alone. A gift from my dad for making honor roll. He said first class wasn't just about comfort. It was about showing up in spaces that people didn't expect you to be in, and sitting there anyway. He smiled when he booked it, told me, "You've earned this. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise." At first, I believed him. For a moment, it had felt perfect. The steward walking past had smiled at me. The cabin lights were soft. Even the welcome music sounded like something out of a movie. For maybe 30 seconds, I thought this would be one of those core memories people talk about. Then she came. She moved with that kind of practiced poise, efficient, polished, used to being listened to. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" she asked. Her smile didn't match her tone. Felt like a test. I reached into my hoodie pocket and handed her my ticket. "Seat 3B, first class." She glanced at it, then looked right back at me like the paper didn't mean anything. "This is first class," she said slowly, as if I hadn't noticed, as if I didn't belong past the curtain I had walked through with everyone else. "Where are your parents?" she asked next. That one hit harder than the rest. I felt my shoulders draw in, instinctively, like I had to defend something. "My dad booked this for me," I said. "I'm flying alone." I saw the flicker in her eyes, like that answer didn't compute. She sighed. Not with concern, not like someone trying to help. It was the kind of sigh adults give when they're annoyed you exist, like you're making their job harder just by being where you are. "There must be a mistake," she said, already turning away. "This seat is reserved for first-class passengers only." I blinked. My brain was still catching up, trying to find a place to fit her words. My stomach tightened. I looked around, not to plead, but to find something human in the room. Anything. A man in a blazer glanced away quickly. A woman pulled her scarf closer, suddenly focused on her coffee. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of things people didn't say. I knew what was happening, but part of me still waited, still hoped someone would speak up. No one did. I repeated myself, quieter this time. "But this is my seat." She didn't soften. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice went cold. "There's been some confusion. Take your things and follow me." I didn't move right away. My fingers tightened around the strap of my backpack. It wasn't confusion. Not really. It was a decision, and she had already made it. I stood slowly, not because I was being slow, but because everything around me suddenly felt too loud and too quiet at the same time. The ticket in my hand had started to crumple. I didn't even realize I was gripping it so tightly. My backpack was wedged under the seat, and for a second, I struggled to pull it free. She didn't offer to help. She just turned and started walking. Her pace wasn't rushed, more like someone who knew they wouldn't be questioned. I stepped into the aisle. My legs weren't shaking, but they weren't steady either. The aisle felt longer than before. As I walked past the rows of first-class passengers, I could feel it. The glances, the quiet adjustments, the deliberate looking away. A man shifted his newspaper higher. A woman turned slightly toward the window, pretending to search for something in her bag. One flight attendant a few rows back glanced up, just for a moment, and then looked right back down. No one stopped me. No one said a word. I passed them all like I was fading out of their world. And maybe I was. The curtain to economy swayed slightly as I pushed through. The air felt different here, thinner, more recycled. The seats were narrower, closer together. I didn't know if the light was actually dimmer or if that's just how it felt. She pointed silently to an empty seat near the back and walked away. I slid into it, suddenly unsure how to sit. The armrest was warm from someone else before me. My fingers unclenched from the ticket, which now looked more like a receipt than a boarding pass. I didn't want to cry, not because I was too strong, but because I'd done nothing wrong, and that somehow made the whole thing feel worse. Like I had to keep calm just to prove I didn't deserve this. My chest felt tight, but I kept my face still. I pulled out my phone, not to play a game or scroll, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I stared at the screen, then typed, "They made me move to the back," said I couldn't sit in first class. I had my ticket. She didn't believe me. The reply came almost immediately. "What do you mean they made you move? Who?" My dad's texts were never long, but I could feel the sharpness in each word. I hesitated before typing again. "The flight attendant." She said there was a mistake. A longer pause this time. The typing indicator blinked, stopped, blinked again. Then one line came in. "What's the flight number?" I could picture him at his desk, jaw tight, fingers already moving toward his computer. I typed the number carefully. Then I just stared at the screen, waiting. My reflection in the phone's glass looked smaller than I expected. Another message came in. "Stay where you are. I'll handle it." I didn't know what that meant, but I knew my dad, and if he said it wasn't over, then it wasn't. At the front of the plane, Miss Caldwell moved with practiced ease. She reached the galley, adjusted her collar, and let out a quiet, satisfied breath. Another problem solved. Her face said it all. This was routine. She didn't see the boy anymore. He had been a disturbance, a detail, something she had filed away without thought, without consequence. She reached for a metal tray of glasses, her expression returning to its polished, professional calm. But not everyone had moved on. Nicole, the younger flight attendant, stood nearby. She had watched everything. The way Miss Caldwell's tone had sharpened. The way she hadn't even checked the system before making the boy leave. Her stomach was tight with unease. She hesitated, then slowly turned to the cabin control panel, tapping twice to pull up the seat assignment list. There it was, clear as day. Seat 3B. His name. His booking. Her throat tightened. Was there a problem with his ticket? She asked, trying to sound neutral. Miss Caldwell scoffed. Please. You saw him. Do you really think he paid for first class? The words landed like something rotten on the counter. Nicole didn't reply. She had worked enough flights to know better than to challenge Caldwell directly. 15 years on the job had made her untouchable. But this wasn't just a gut feeling anymore. The system confirmed it, he belonged in that seat. Nicole looked down at her hands, then at Miss Caldwell, who was already moving on, still certain she was right. You didn't check the system, Nicole said under her breath. Miss Caldwell waved her off. Trust me. I know when someone doesn't belong. Nicole swallowed hard. She knew exactly what she'd just witnessed. She also knew the boy wouldn't be the only one remembered after this flight. The intercom crackled overhead. Miss Caldwell, please report to the cockpit immediately. The voice was calm, professional, but there was something beneath it, something too measured, too deliberate. Nicole looked up. Miss Caldwell paused, tray in hand. It was only a second, but it showed. Then she composed herself, set the tray down with a faint clink, and smoothed the front of her uniform with practiced elegance. She turned toward the front of the plane, spine straight, chin level, like she was walking into a crew briefing or turbulence protocol. But this didn't feel like procedure. Not quite. As she passed Nicole, she caught the young attendant's eyes, brief, unreadable, and disappeared through the narrow cockpit door. Inside, the lights were dimmer. The air was cooler. The captain turned to face her. His arms were crossed, not in greeting, but in judgment. But what made her chest tighten was what stood behind him. The glowing in-flight phone screen, connected to a secure call. On it, seated at a glass desk in a high-rise somewhere far below, was a man in a dark suit. The city lights behind him shimmered, out of focus. But his eyes were sharp, still, unblinking. He didn't introduce himself with warmth or courtesy. He didn't need to. "Miss Caldwell," he said, his voice clear. "Do you know who I am?" She blinked, swallowed. "No, sir." The captain answered for her, his voice cold. "This is Mr. Coleman, the owner of this airline." The words hit like a silent alarm going off inside her. Her lungs tightened, but she stayed quiet. Mr. Coleman didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch. "You removed my son from his assigned seat in first class," he continued, "without verifying his ticket, without checking the system, without reason." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Not an excuse, not even a denial. The silence on the line wasn't empty, it was deliberate, controlled. Mr. Coleman let the pause stretch just long enough to make the wait settle. "You will return to the economy section," he said, "and personally escort my son back to his seat." Then, after the slightest beat, came the final blow. "And when this flight lands, you will explain yourself to the executive board." The screen went dark. The call ended. The cabin felt smaller now, quieter, as if every inch of air had been accounted for. She stood still for a moment longer. For 15 years, she had been the one who made the rules behind the curtain. But for the first time, she wasn't standing on authority. She was standing on nothing, and she could feel it giving way beneath her feet. She stepped out of the cockpit like someone waking from a dream that had shifted into a nightmare. Her shoes tapped lightly down the aisle, but each step felt heavier. The cabin lights hadn't changed, but everything looked different now, brighter, harsher. When she crossed the curtain back into economy, her eyes locked on him instantly. He was sitting by the window, perfectly still, his face unreadable. He wasn't crying. He wasn't making a scene. He was just there, present, calm. She cleared her throat, crouching slightly, her voice now quieter. "Sir," she said, "there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to escort you back to your original seat in first class." Jaylen blinked slowly, then turned his head toward her. "A misunderstanding?" His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even cold. It was steady, observing. Her face flushed. A few passengers nearby exchanged glances. They'd heard what happened. They remembered her words from earlier. Caldwell nodded quickly. "Yes, there was an error in seating," she said. He looked her in the eye. "I had my ticket. You saw it. And you still told me to move." Her hands fidgeted just for a second. "I may have made a mistake in judgment," she murmured. "But I'd like to correct it now. Please, come with me." He didn't move right away. He didn't raise his voice. He just watched her, long enough for the silence to feel unbearable. Then he reached for his phone. A soft chime broke the tension. Miss Caldwell's work tablet vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out, hands slightly trembling, and read the message. It was from the executive office. "Take your time. Make her understand what she did." Her pulse quickened. She looked up again. Jaylen was still watching her. Not with defiance, but with a calm she couldn't match. "I'll go back," he said finally. "But I want to know why you thought I didn't belong there." His words didn't rise. They didn't accuse. But they landed harder than any outburst could. And for the first time, it was Miss Caldwell who didn't know what to say. The descent began. The engines softened. The cabin dimmed. But inside Miss Caldwell's mind, the noise only grew louder. She stood at the front again, but the sense of authority she once carried had vanished. She stole a glance toward first class. Jaylen sat quietly, flipping through the in-flight magazine like nothing had happened. No anger, no arrogance, just a kind of quiet confidence that unsettled her far more than any confrontation ever could. For once, she wasn't the one making the rules. And that realization clung to her like turbulence that wouldn't pass. The plane landed smoothly, but for her, it felt like a crash. As passengers began to gather their things, the intercom cut through the rustle. "Miss Caldwell, please remain on board." Her stomach dropped. She had expected it, but hearing it aloud made it real. One by one, people filed past her. Some cast quick glances. Others didn't look at her at all. Then Jaylen stood. He adjusted his hoodie, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and walked slowly down the aisle. Just before reaching the door, he paused. Looked at her. Not with anger, not with pity, just clarity. He nodded. Not as a thank you, not as forgiveness, but as proof that he remembered, that he'd carry this, and that she would too. The door opened. Light from the jet bridge spilled into the cabin, bright and colorless. A uniformed security officer stepped inside. "Come with me," he said. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then followed. Each step onto the bridge felt like shedding a layer she couldn't retrieve. The carpet was thin. The hum of the airport returned. She caught her reflection in the glass panel. Crooked name tag, creased collar, and something else. A face she didn't quite recognize. For years, she had walked these halls in control, in charge, invisible unless needed. But today, she wasn't walking with purpose. She was walking under weight. She could feel the stairs, even if they weren't there. Could hear the silence pressing against the walls. And for the first time, she truly understood. This wasn't just about a mistake. It was about assumption. About how quickly power can shift when someone finally says, "I see you." And about how, when we think no one's watching, that's exactly when it matters most. She walked the jet bridge like someone retracing their steps after realizing they'd dropped something precious behind. But there was nothing left to retrieve. Each footfall landed heavier than the last, though the carpet beneath her was thin and soft. The lights above were bright, sterile, but she couldn't shake the feeling of walking into a darker place. The silence pressed in again. Not because it was quiet, but because she could hear the absence of the life she used to own. She caught glimpses of airline staff behind the glass, barely moving, their eyes shifting away when she passed. Not out of politeness, out of discomfort, maybe even recognition. Her badge still hung on her chest, but it didn't feel like it belonged there anymore. Not after today. The officer walking ahead of her didn't say much. He didn't need to. His pace was steady, professional, but she could tell he'd done this before. Escorted people who weren't in handcuffs, but who still wore the shame of having crossed a line they thought was invisible. She passed a cleaning cart, a line of rolling suitcases, and a young gate agent typing something into a screen. For a moment, Miss Caldwell wanted to be her, to have a small, meaningless task, to be anonymous. But there were eyes now, eyes that had never looked her way before. She wondered if they knew, or worse, if they had guessed long ago and simply waited for her to fall. When they reached the hallway outside the crew door, she stopped. Not because she was told to, but because she needed to. The air felt heavier here, like it remembered everything that had passed through. She looked down at her shoes, suddenly aware of how stiff they were, how long she'd stood in them believing she owned every step. The officer turned. "This way, ma'am." She followed. Her posture was still upright, but inside, she was folding in on herself. And as she walked into the side corridor reserved for internal staff evaluations, she realized something that stung deeper than discipline. This wasn't the end of her career. It was the beginning of everyone finally seeing who she had been all along.